and the topic under the topic victims are the Cinderella of CJS. But be with us, Lord, during the session and bless us to make it a success. In Jesus' precious name, we pray. Amen. A small introduction about the guest. I think I am audible. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, you are audible.
Dr. Vijaya Gauri Shankar is a qualified victimologist and a human resource consultant with survey research, teaching, and counseling skills. She has successfully completed a victimology survey of adolescents in South India. She has published a book by her work was published by the Mannoenmaniam Sundarnal University as a book. She was a part of the UK India Education Research Initiative project that explored the implementation of policies and law protecting child victims of sexual offences. She has several publications to her credit, both national and international. Vidya has traveled widely in India and abroad. She has a co-presenter of a workshop, creating safe space for women at the International Women's Summit at Zurich, Switzerland, and on domestic violence at the International Symposium of the World Society of Victimology at The Hague, Netherlands. She has been invited to talk at various seminars and workshops in and around Tamil Nadu and many other places. She is an academician too. Now she is residing in the USA. Let us all welcome her for this talk. Thank you. And Dr. Vijaya, to you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Sunanda. That was an awesome introduction. I'm really grateful to all of you at Karunya University. And let me just share my screen right now and begin the presentation for you.
Ma'am?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, then proceed. You can proceed, ma'am.
Yes. So the topic here is victim, the Cinderella of criminology. I'm sure all the students who are right now, first of all, let me wish you all, students, faculty of Karunya University, a very good evening to all of you, to other students from other institutions, faculty, and distinguished academicians from other institutions. A very good evening to all of you. I'm quite honored to be given this opportunity to present a webinar here for you. And my topic here is Victim, the Cinderella of Criminology. I'm sure for all the students, this must be quite an intriguing phrase, but for the academicians and criminologists, it is something that they have heard often. Now, when I traced the origins of this phrase, I found that it was a quote by a Swiss lawyer and Professor Hans Felix Feniger, who in 1956 gave this phrase when he was arguing about victim compensation. This topic came about when one would wonder why this phrase, was he talking about this phrase? First of all, the criminology in very simple terms is a study of crime. It is a study of crime and of its causes and its consequences. And in any crime, there will be a criminal and a victim. Now, for some reason, throughout time from the 20th century, the criminologists or the criminal justice system has completely focused completely on the criminal, on looking at the
yes, thank you, sir.
So it is on the study of, it is about completely focused on the criminal, and the victim got sidelined somehow. So there is a lot of, the criminal justice system is completely talking only about penal function and getting punishment for the criminal, for the accused. Now, let us look at some basics. Before we go into more about this phrase, let us look at some basics of criminology and victimology. So here you go. So let us look at some definitions of victimology and the victim. Victimology is a science. Now, let us look at um, a, consider a case where you are, reviewing a lot of news articles or about crime generally, and you think that, okay, so why are so many victims women? Now, this is a generalization that you're thinking, and it's a kind of a hypothesis. But a victimologist would do a scientific research about it. He or she would go out and collect data, gather data about this crime and victims, and then analyze the data. And based on that data, they would find out if the hypothesis is indeed true. If it is true, then they go into the why part of it. So victimology is a scientific study of victims. It is a science, and it looks into victimization. What is victimization? It is a process by which the victim undergoes that harm or that injury. So victimology looks at the causes of that victimization, and then what happens after that? What is the consequence of that victimization? And how does the criminal justice system deal with the victim? And after that, and then we look at the different elements of society also, which deal with or respond to crime victims. Now, what is the first thing one of the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about different elements is the media. Now, in the aftermath of a crime, you just imagine a scenario where there'll be the police, there might be the medical personnel, but in addition to that, there'll be the media. They'll be shoving mics in the face of the victim if the victim continues to be at that scene, or if they are injured, then injured and gone to the hospital, taken away to the hospital, then there'll be the other people who were along with that victim, or the onlookers. They will be asked to, they'll be asked to talk about how did this happen, why did this happen, and then do you know why, how do you feel about it? These are the typical ways in which the media comes across with crime victims. So victimology goes into looking at all these aspects about uh, victims. Then, coming to the definition of a victim. Now, we have the UN Declaration. The United Nations has given a declaration on basic principles of justice for victims of crime and abuse of power, 1985. Now, this is one of the strongest pillars of victimology. It is because of this, it is only because of this that victim rights was people all over the world, or the nations all over the world, began to take victim rights seriously. Now, here you can see the definition given, which is a very expansive and very exhaustive definition, where when you're talking about victims as persons who are suffering different kinds of harm. They are physical, mental, emotional, economic, and then their rights are affected through unlawful acts or omissions, including abuse of power. Now, look at this abuse of power. Now, power, it can be political, social, economic. So when a person with power intimidates another person using violence, corrupt, fraudulent means, then that is an abuse of power. And the person who is suffering because of that is the victim of abuse of power. Now, another important part here that you will notice is that victims also includes the immediate family or dependents of the actual victim. So those who are very close to the victim and those who are loved ones, dependents, obviously they're going to be affected by what the victim has undergone. So it is because of this declaration that people started to seriously think about these, and the kind of victimization they are suffering is also called as secondary victimization. We will come to that later. So this is the basics about victimology and victim, and victimology is a subfield of criminology. So you can now kind of get to know why this victim is called as, why victim and criminology is being talked about here in this phrase. So we come back to our phrase, which is the topic of our session here today. Now, Cinderella. Cinderella is a classic fairy tale. It is the unjust oppression of a kind, beautiful, selfless girl. It's a fairy tale about about a girl who loses her loving father, who's harassed and ill-treated by her cruel stepmother. Then she's forbidden to attend a royal ball. And ultimately, a fairy godmother helps her out, and she's found by her prince and lives happily ever after. So the analogy that I'm looking at here and conjuring up here is that just like Cinderella was victim, was abused, was neglected, hidden away for a long time by in her stepmom's household, and finally, with the help of a godmother, unexpectedly achieves recognition and happiness when she's found by her prince. So victims across the world have been neglected by the criminal justice system, and finally, because of some godmothers, we will see who are these godmothers, and victims are slowly being recognized by society. Criminology for a long time has been focusing a great deal on the rights and rehabilitation of the offender. In this process, the victim has gone into the background, overlooked and sidelined like the forgotten Cinderella in her stepmother's home. So this is the basis for this is the story. What I'm going to tell you is the story of the victim Cinderella, not actual Cinderella, but the victim. Why and how the victim is being referred to as the Cinderella of victim criminology. So through this, as I'm leading you through this story, we are going to be looking, this session will look at how it all began, how the field of victimology emerged, and then what is victim precipitation, victim facilitation, victim provocation, and then who were the founders of this field. Now, these are what I'm going to call as godmothers of our Cinderella story. And then the classification, the typology of victims, the victims' rights movement, the victim service agencies, organizations, and then why do we need to study victimology? Why is it important to study victimology? And finally, the status of victimology in India. So let us now look at the historical development of victimology. Now, from the ancient period, crime is something that has existed since mankind. So in a victim, the state that a victim exists was acknowledged. It was acknowledged all from time immemorial. But previously, in the ancient period, especially in the Middle Ages, it was the victim was always in focus. The burden of the justice system was on the victim. That is, if a crime happened, it was left to the victim to come forward and seek what is called as retribution. So they would look at the phrase used here would be an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This phrase, along with the idea of some laws, goes back to ancient Mesopotamian culture. And this is a paraphrase from the Hammurabi's Code, which is a collection of some 282 laws prescribed by a Mesopotamian king of the same name, Hammurabi, in the 18th century BC. So it simply means that, retribution, revenge. So the concept was that if a person destroyed the eye of another, then that person would lose his eye. His eye would be destroyed himself. So interestingly, in those times, if a physician or a doctor had performed an operation on a patient and the patient lost his life, the physician's hands were cut off. So that was the brutal retribution that existed in those days. And this underlying this was the principle of lex talionis. As time went by, this was the principle that was adhered to, and where there was retribution and the victim could get restitution. Restitution was when the offender who had to repay. He had to repay, compensate, reimburse the victim. And it was not only the exact same thing. For example, if a person stole somebody, if a victim's cow was stolen, then the offender, the criminal, would have to return the cow. In addition to that, he would have to give another cow. So that's the extra charge. And so that the victim would be restored to the original position that they were in. So it is restoring the harm that the offender did. Then the next stage came when in the post-industrial, after the Industrial Revolution, unfortunately, the focus shifted from the victim to the state. So when any crime happened, it was considered as a offense against the state. The state started taking up on behalf of the victim, but unfortunately, that simply led to this victim being sidelined out of the criminal justice system. So, since crime were a violation of the state, it benefited the state also because the state could now charge fines and monies and charges, and so it was a good thing for the state, but it was very unfortunate for the victim. Now, let us look at how the victims were excluded from the criminal justice system. Now, I would like to share with you a few quotes here. That's from our own Indian side. Here we have a very famous phrase by a well-known author, Krishna Deo Gaur, who wrote this phrase in the textbook on Indian Penal Code, where he's indicating that the criminal, it's a very, look at the irony, the criminal is being taken care of by the system, and which is being paid by the society, which includes the victim. So this is so sad. This is so unfortunate. And the look at the next quote, which is by a very victim-friendly Supreme Court judge, Honorable Justice Krishna Iyer, who has talked about how victims are vanishing. Victim reparation is vanishing from the criminal law. So now the point here that now looking at these two quotations, you will see the years. Look at that. This is at this is in 1979, and this is right now in 2009. So that's not very, I mean, almost very close by, hardly a few years back. So the situation hasn't changed much. So even though I would be really leading you through the stage where victims are being recognized, unfortunately, the criminal justice system, they're still at the realm. And then here, Justice Krishna Iyer is talking about how the system, the deficiency must be rectified by the legislature. Now, the very irony, a very sad, unfortunate fact, because in just recently, in 2013, the Justice Verma Committee came out with a report in the aftermath of the Delhi rape, that the root cause of the violence against women is the lack of good governance. So, which has led to the failure of the criminal justice system as well as the police in protecting the rights of the victim. So, legislature is in charge of good governance. So, it is obvious that this change in the legislature is not, it's not yet happening. He said that in 2013, and we still don't see that many changes happening in the legislature. So these are unfortunate things that is happening as in and talking about when we are talking about victim being sidelined by the criminal justice system. Now coming back, it was in the 1940s. This is a historical development of victimology that we are going through. So in the 1940s, the focus came back onto the victim again. Now, how did this happen? It was not in a good way, however, unfortunately, because the researchers and the academicians or activists who are focusing on, were trying to bring back the focus on, did that by chance, and they were looking at many of these researchers looked at how much the victim was responsible for the crime or for what has happened to him or her. So it was more like looking at how much did the victim contribute to that particular incident. What did the victim do to instigate the criminal to commit the murder? So the concepts that came out of these academicians' research was victim precipitation, victim facilitation, and victim provocation. So we'll look at these concepts here, and we will see how this was through an unfortunate means of focus shifting back again onto the victim from the state. So victim precipitation is the extent to which a victim is responsible for his or her victimization. Now, I will be showing you a small clip here. And in this clip, you will be watching about protagonist. The protagonist is kind of instigating the victimization that will ultimately happen. This clip is from a very recent successful Malayalam film. And we will discuss more about it when you have watched. So just kindly bear with me while I kind of, share a new screen. Just hold on. I'm sorry, I think it didn't, only the audio was there. Let me just share. Just hold on.
Yeah, yeah. Now it is okay. Can you increase some sound, ma'am?
YouTube போகுது.
Yeah. So you saw that, yeah, the film actually consists of two protagonists. This is one protagonist, the other is a police officer, and they go back and forth between being a victim and an offender. Here, this protagonist is constantly, instigating, and he suffers. He's victimized by the police officer, and the reverse also happens throughout the film. The film has several layers, and it is quite interesting. It could even be a point, a movie that can be discussed in class. It is a whole topic that can be discussed. So let us look at the next uh, concept, that is victim facilitation. Now, victim facilitation. So here, the victim unintentionally, makes it easier for the criminal to commit the crime. So here you can see what I'm trying to show you. Like, she's got these purse that she has, which is quite obvious. And I'm not saying that every time a woman carries a purse, it will be snatched. But if she happens to walk into a street or a particular part of the city where it is known, robbery is known, that she's setting herself up for that purse being snatched. So this kind of thing we are able to understand. But here again, the connotation is that the victim kind of facilitated the crime. So that was the unfortunate thing about this concept at that point of time by the researchers. So the next concept was victim provocation. Now again, victim provocation is when the victim incites another person to commit an illegal act. Now again, I'll be showing you a clip, and I'll be sharing a new screen. And what you will be seeing here is the scene of domestic violence between a husband and wife. So, and it would be interesting to watch. Just hold on there for a moment. Yes. So that was, even though it is, that scene is considered as a humorous scene, that is a typical scene of a domestic violence where the woman is harassed so much that she goes to a point to which she then, attacks back. So another famous case, a thing that I would like to mention here is the Lorena Bobbitt case in the USA, which was one of the first where this kind of, when the victim, incites and sorry, the victim commits an act when they are, threatened so much. So in the Bobbitt case, a man, a husband raped his wife, and the wife cut off the, in a fit of rage, cut off the sex organ of her husband. Now, uh, the the point fact is that in marital rape is considered an offense in the US. It is not considered an offense yet in India. So, however, there were two cases, the against the wife and as well as against the husband, and the husband was acquitted, the wife was acquitted. So it's still an unfortunate thing. So here we have these concepts that were given by the researchers, and who are the actual godmother, who I'm referring to as godmothers here, who help to bring victims to light, but in an unfortunate way. Now, who are these academicians or researchers? They were very famous. They were the proponents of victimology: Hans von Hentig, Benjamin Mendelssohn, Stephen Schoffer, Marvin Wolfgang, and Menachem Amir. Now, we'll be looking at some of their ideas which they put forth. I won't be going into all of them, but some of them. Now, all of them basically looked at how much the victim was responsible for their crime, and they did not. It was not with any kind of sympathy or kindness. So Hans von Hentig, one of the first to talk about the victim, he said that you must consider victims and criminal as a dyad, that they must be looked at together. And he attempted to identify characteristics in the victim that increase the risk of their own victimization. So according to him, victims may provoke their own victimization, and this was through some of their characteristics. Like, for instance, the young, old, and females, because of their vulnerability, they were physically weak, because they were ignorant. Then the depressed, wanton, lonesome, heartbroken, where because of their mental state, they were unable to recognize danger, and so they were victimized. Then immigrants and minorities, because of their social status, they were not able to get help easily from the society. The tormentors resorted to violence and aggression, and therefore they were opening themselves up for more victimization. The mentally deranged, the dull normals, were unable to recognize or respond to threats in the environment. And the blocked, exempted of fighting, were those who made poor decisions and were therefore unable to seek help. An example here would be a young girl who's being blackmailed by her ex-boyfriend with pictures or with letters or whatever. So these characteristics increase their risk of victimization, is what he indicated. Now, going back, now let us look at Benjamin Mendelssohn, who is the father of victimology. He's been coined, he coined the term victimology, and he interviewed a lot of victims and witnesses and found that in many of the crime cases, the victims and the criminals knew each other. They had some sort of an existing relationship. So he classified victims, and he called the degree of victim blame as culpability. He classified the victims on this culpability. And he was the first, but however, he was able to, he did say that there was the completely innocent victim who did not contribute to their victimization at all, were simply victims because of the circumstances or whatever. So the completely, how he said that the completely innocent victim would typically be children or those who were attacked while unconscious. So there were other, based on this degree of victim culpability, there was the voluntary victim with a minor guilt because they were ignorant. For example, a woman, suppose you walk down a street which is known for, pickpocketing or chain snatching or whatever, but you're not aware of that. So then you are a victim with minor guilt. Then the voluntary victim is one who is equally, uh, you know, guilty, in the sense that, consider a suicide pact. Two people are thinking that they will commit suicide together, or two people, doing a robbery together, and then one of them gets injured in the process. They may be a victim, but they are as guilty as the offender. Then sorry they are more yeah Then there is the victim more guilty than the offender, who invokes or he provokes or induces the other to commit a crime. And then the most guilty victim is an attacker who is killed in self-defense. The imaginary victim is one who has not suffered anything, but who is accusing another falsely. So these were some of the classifications that Mendelssohn gave. Now we will look at Marvin Wolfgang and Menachem Amir, because I don't want to bore you too much about the different classification, because now you would see that most of these classifications were almost very similar. They were all talking about how the victim and the criminal, there was some kind of, always some kind of relationship, and how they were responsible for the crime, for what was their responsibility in the crime. So Marvin Eugene Wolfgang was an American sociologist, a very influential criminologist. In any crime, if the victim was a person who dealt the first blow, initiated a conflict or a fight, then he called the case as victim precipitated. Now, he did a study of homicides in Philadelphia between these years of 1948 and 52, and he found that almost a quarter of the homicides were victim precipitated. Now, he also identified some common characteristics in these kind of victim precipitated homicides. The He found, as I said, the relationship between the victim and the offender. And in most of these cases, they were, both the victim and the offender were male. They had a history of violent offending. And then he found that alcohol plays a role in these kind of homicides. Now, going back, we now look at Menachem Amir. Now, he was Wolfgang's student, and his study was actually very controversial. It was about rape incidents in Philadelphia, and he also looked at how the victim, was responsible for the rape or victim precipitated. And these were his findings are there up for you. And it was controversial because it was almost very clear, almost like he was blaming the victim through the study. Though he said that the victim's behavior was viewed by the offender as going against appropriate female. What does he mean by that? He said that the offender was assumed that, or thought the victim to have dressed seductively, wearing revealing clothing, had bad reputation, used bad language, and hence she invited the rape. So this is a controversy, and this is a kind of victim blaming that goes on even now. If you remember, it's very unfortunate that in the aftermath of the Delhi crime, there were politicians who were talking about, oh, why did she go out at that hour of the night, and why was she accompanied? She was with a boyfriend. That is not how good girls behave in our culture. So this kind of victim blaming continues even today. So it is um, it is unfortunate. So here we have these proponents of victimology, whom I'm calling as the godmothers, who brought victimology to light. Now, how did the focus, now, although the focus was on the victim, how did it shift from blame to sympathy? So there were three. Let's look at that. There were three reasons how the victims' rights movements came about. So one was the National Crime Survey, the women's rights movements, and the civil rights movements. Now, the National Crime Survey. Now, what happened was in the 1960s, there was a increase in the rate of crime in USA. So the government responded by conducting a national crime survey. This crime survey, which later came to be known as the Crime Victimization Survey, revealed a lot of things. First of all, this survey was done but not by using official reports. That is, official reports in the sense taking reports from the police about the crimes that were committed, like the FIR in India. So official crime statistics are based on those reports. But National Crime Survey here in the US, this particular crime survey was done by asking the questions to the victims to recall, to tell them, to give the details of their victimization or experience with the crime. So this particular crime survey found that there is a huge gap between what is actually happening and what is reported. So this, in victimology, we call it as a dark figure of crime. So official statistics says one thing, but the actual crime that is happening is much more and is extensive. There are a lot of people are getting victimized, and more importantly, they are not coming out and telling about it. They're not talking about it. They are reluctant to report the crime. So you can see how the victim was sidelined from the criminal justice system, and how that, getting into the limelight is still difficult. So here we have the National Crime Survey, which contributed its part, and then the women's rights movement. Now, the women's rights movement uh, was primarily concerned with fighting for equality of women against the social system of patriarchy, then the traditional family view, against subjugation and oppression of women. So in all this, it became quite apparent that uh, they have to take up these women, that when these activists have to take up the issue of victimization of women, which includes sexual assault, rape, domestic violence. Not only that, they began to focus on how female victims were being treated by the criminal justice system. In 1970s, a lot of shelters, domestic violence shelters, rape crisis centers came into being in the US. The women's movement automatically also pushed the case for children's rights. For the first time, children were now identified as victims who had rights. People came to realize that children suffered victimization just like adults and required special assistance and services to overcome the victimization. So the women's rights movement uh, led to three developments. That is, first of all, that it came to be people came to understand that victims suffer psychological harm also. So, and they require counseling. Now, that is when they kind of separated the victim assistance services from the criminal justice system. So a lot of voluntary organizations, non-governmental organizations began to take up this issue, and they started shelters and centers, and this did not rely on the government. So this separated from the criminal justice system and began to take on its own, and that lent more support to the victims' rights movement. Then the civil rights movement at the same time was creating awareness about how minorities were being ill-treated and being oppressed. And the criminal justice system was mistreating both the offenders and victims who belong to minority communities. So this, all the support led to the victims' rights movement. The important thing about the victims' rights movement is that it helped to bring about procedural changes in the way the criminal justice system operated with respect to victims. So criminal justice system started waking up to the uh, victim rights. Now, in 1965, a victim compensation program for the first time was started in California to help victims meet the costs of victimization. Victim assistance programs were now being located in district attorney offices, lawyers' offices, and which lent a lot of support to the victims in providing them support by taking them to the courts and creating separate waiting areas, informing them about the court dates and all that. And in this time, another awareness also arose among those who were, dependents and loved ones of victims. They began to come forward and, come together to support themselves, because they are also suffering. If you recall, the UN declaration states that they are also victims. They have suffered secondary victimization. So there were organizations like the Family and Friends of Missing Persons, Parents of Murdered Children. So these were all people, dependents of the actual victim, who were coming together to form victim organizations. All these organizations resulted in some policy changes that affected victim rights. They were all instrumental in that way. Now, we come to why do we need to study victimology? There are three reasons. One is that there is the criminal victimization surveys revealed. What the surveys revealed, they revealed that there was a lot of victimization that is not being reported. The victims are not feeling, they are not unable to, they don't feel, they feel very reluctant to report. They're alienated from the criminal justice system. So there's a lot of gap, the dark figure of crime. And then there is the costs to society. Now, there are both financial and non-financial costs. Now, I would like to give an analogy here of the current scenario. Now, right now, we are being victimized by a virus. Now, and this and the cost that we are facing, it is apparent. I mean, it's all around you. You're seeing the cost in terms of economy is coming down on their knees. Economies are falling down, and people are dying on one hand, and the other there is people losing jobs. There are so much unfortunately, so much of costs is going for the society. And then the intangible or the non-financial cost, that's even greater, that we don't even know now what is the consequence. Because you imagine so many people crammed together in different in the slum areas. People are being, because of the lockdown, there are families crammed together, 10 people in one room. Can you imagine what the trauma would be? What would be the consequence of all that? For months together, they are now living in close quarters. And we have even heard reports of domestic violence going up. So that is all the cost to society. So we are actually seeing that cost. So you can see that victimization involves cost to society. And then the UN Declaration gave that has stated very emphatically that victims have rights. They have the right to access to justice and fair treatment, restitution, compensation, and assistance. Now, what do you mean by access to justice? That when victims ultimately they come in contact with the criminal justice system, and then they must be treated with compassion and respect for their dignity. They must be informed of their rights. Their views and concerns must be taken into consideration during the justice process. They must not be inconvenienced by unnecessary administrative procedures, formalities, papers, those kind of red tape. And then in all this, their privacy and safety should be ensured. So they have rights to all this. So that is what the UN Declaration states. Now, restitution, right to restitution is that the offender returns or reimburses or compensates the victim. If the offender has harmed the environment, then he or she has to be involved in the restoration or reconstruction of the environment. Now, when the offender is unable to do the compensation because of some reason, the compensation must be taken care of by the state, and that is the right to compensation. So the state should compensate the victim when the offender is unable to do so, and or it should also, in addition to that, and then there is the right to assistance. So all the necessary medical, material, psychological, social assistance through both government and non-government agencies should be given to the victim, should be assured to the victim. And underpinning all this, the UN Declaration also states that police, the frontline responders like police, justice, health, social service, all of them must receive training about how to deal with victims. So all this, that victims have rights, that victimization involves cost to society, and then that crime is being, there is a dark figure of crime where crime is not being reported, victims are hiding away. So all this tells us that there is a need to study victimology. Now, just like the fairy godmother who helped Cinderella meet the prince, it is now time for Cinderella to emerge from the shadows of her stepmother's home and find her happiness. Unless we in the society understand the importance of victimology, it will be difficult to, kind of the plight of victims to come out, and victims' rights will always remain a dream. Now, we got to how the last aspect, which is the status of victimology in India. Prior to the UN Declaration of 1985, criminal justice in India was offender oriented. So the victim was never in the picture. So the elements of criminal justice system comprised law enforcement, prosecution, defense, courts, and corrections, but victim was not one of them. But victim compensation was recognized as a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. It was recognized, and this was made available under Section 357 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. So CRPC Section 357 provided for that. but it was left to the courts to invoke this particular section. So, and and there was also this condition that, the court, the sentence should consist of a fine. So only if the sentence has a big, as an expansive fine attached to it, and if that fine, uh, and out of that fine which is realized from the criminal, recovered from the offender, only that is used for compensation. Now, an example would be, suppose the sentence says that 1,000 rupees is the fine to the offender or the criminal, and it is up to the courts to realize that amount from that offender. And so suppose he's not able to pay, and he ends up paying, say, 500 rupees. Out of that, maybe at the end of the day, the compensation to the victim may be 250 rupees. So it was unfortunate. The conditions was making it difficult. And the thing was that criminal law, from the time, from say many years, for many years, since I think probably 20th century, did not care about much about the compensation to victim. The public it was an unwritten code or understanding among the courts or the criminal justice system, that public prosecution should concern itself only with punishment, the penal function, only punishment to the criminal, taking care, possibly punish him and then probably rehabilitate. This was the focus. There was no focus on getting compensation for the victim. So it was assumed that the victim was not, and it was not allowed to be, the victim was not allowed to be interested financially in the outcome of the prosecution, so that the victim should not disturb the penal process. So this is unfortunate, which was actually made note of. The Law Commission has noted that courts in India hardly ever invoked their statutory or discretionary powers to compensate the victims. And the Supreme Court appealed to all the courts, please do use this section. And it was Honorable Justice Krishna Iyer had even stated that you cannot, give reparation to the victim by increasing the length of the prison term. It makes no sense. So though he didn't, this was in a particular case, he indicated this particular aspect. So what happened now? So how did this, there was a lot of hue and cry, and ultimately, after the UN declaration in 2009, section 357A was inserted into the CRPC. Now, this paved the way for the victim compensation schemes. Now, this schemes is an institutionalized scheme where every state is supposed to maintain a fund for this, and it is doing that. Every state in India maintains a fund for this purpose. The District Legal Services Authority or the State Legal Services Authority is in charge of deciding the amount of compensation. Now, one of a very well-known academician, Professor Dr. Deepa Dubey from IIT Kharagpur, has done a study of all these victim compensation schemes in all the states in India, and she has analyzed and found that these are discrepancies. She has found that there is a lot of difference between all the states. Each state is doing almost doing its own thing, including varying amounts of compensation, right from the minimum of 25,000 to 10 lakhs. There is no uniformity across the states in how they are giving compensation to the victims. And there's a lot of burden. This scheme involves a lot of burden on the victims. How? Obviously, just like anything, government consists of a lot of complicated administrative procedures, formalities, paperwork. So that is increasing the burden on the victim, who is already traumatized. They are made to go through all that. And then the last one is the delay. So justice delayed is justice denied. So it's like there is a delay in processing applications, which is very unfortunate. Now, I should just give you a snapshot of what is available online in our government website from the National Legal Services Authority. There are a lot of statistics there. I've just taken a small part of it. This is the latest. So from 2018 to 2019, you can see the amount of applications received for victim compensation. and then the applications that are pending, and the applications of compensation award. So you can see there's so much difference and variations across the states. And the most worrying thing is the number of applications that are pending, like in Delhi, Karnataka, Orissa. There's so many applications. Though the heartening fact is that there are applications being received, but there are some states where there are hardly any applications being received for victim compensation, and the large variation. So this is just a snapshot of reality, check about how victim compensation scheme is working out in India. So now we come to some positive aspects. That is, victimology in India has seen some pioneering efforts. Like for the first time, the first ever victimology and victim assistance course was offered by Manononim Sundarnath University and coordinated by Dr. Beulah Shaker. And under Dr. Shaker, several pioneering victimization studies have been carried out. An exhaustive list of these studies is available on Google Scholar. And another important aspect is the setting up of the Indian Society of Victimology. It was founded by Dr. K. Chokalingam in 1992, and he is the former Vice Chancellor of Manononim Sundarnath University. The society is has been instrumental in advocating or creating awareness about the cause of victims of crime and abuse of power in India, and has done that through several conferences, seminars, symposiums, special lectures, and workshops. Right now, of course, there are a lot of institutions like the National Law University in Delhi, and many other institutions across India and in South India, which are now conducting courses on victimology and are taking up the causes of victims. So that's a very positive aspect that is happening in India today. And now we come to the end of our session, that the Cinderella has been found. Can she make peace with her stepmother and siblings? So victims have suffered, they have rights, they require reparation and compensation in a speedy, inexpensive, and compassionate manner with respect for their dignity. This must be understood and accepted by the criminal justice system. Only if this happens, then this Cinderella story will end in happily ever after. So I come to the end of my session, and I'm quite I hope I hope I have communicated this concept and this phrase of why the victim is a Cinderella of criminology. So I hand over the session to you, sir.
Sunanda ma'am.
Participants, if you have any questions, you can put it on the chat. Just a minute, I'll just open the chat for you. The chat window is now open for you. Participants, if you have any question, you can put it on the chat window. Madam, there is a...
Yeah.
What is... Ma'am, can you see the chat box, chat window?
I'm not very sure. Let me see. Just hold on.
I'll just read out the question.
Okay, yeah, please do that.
Madam, what is meant by lex talionis?
Oh, okay. Lex talionis. That was the principle of retribution. Eye for an eye. That was what I explained in the beginning itself. That when the victim is suffers something, the offender is supposed to give return back. Whatever the harm that they have committed, restore the victim back to their previous position. So that is what is meant by principle of lex talionis.
Any other questions, participants? I mean, it's a very lengthy paragraph. One paragraph is there. I'll just read it out.
Dinesh. Can you
We
read
Yes,
it?
live
please.
in a fast, yeah,
Like
we
to
live in
ask
a
the question.
fast-paced world. The current landscape is changing, and the extent of awareness and media influence has created a major impact in crime reduction. To what extent do you think the theories, surveys, and studies written in 70s, 80s, and 90s are of much relevance to current societal situations? And if we have to propose for a change, what would it be?
See, you can never deny the importance of research, uh, because victimology, criminology, they're all scientific studies. So it is always research which contributes, which is the starting point for, taking up the case to ultimately what change is going to happen in society is that is in this case, the change will happen only through the legislature, that is through the government. So, who is going to talk to the government? It is this academics and research that is going to be used to talk to the government to convince the government that they have to make the change. So, it is because of this research and this academics that this has happened. It's a continuous process. You cannot separate out years like, okay, what happened in the past is irrelevant. No, all that has to be taken into consideration and the case made for forward uh, um, to the government to make the change. And it is only through that better governance can happen and things can change for victims.
Yeah.
Next question: Are in me two are not me two victims a type of imaginary victims?
I didn't get that. Can you repeat that, please?
Are not me are not me two victims a type of imaginary victims?
Oh,
Okay,
I'm not able to understand what is the
okay, I'm
question.
just moving
Yeah,
to
Sunanda ma'am is there?
yes, sir. I'm
Yeah,
asking.
ma'am.
I'll read it out.
Yes, yes,
I'll read
yes.
it
Yeah,
out.
Sunam.
Ah,
Yeah.
um, in victim support, correctional service is more effective or not?
I begin. What was that?
In victim support,
Uh-huh.
correctional service
No,
is
Sunanda,
more
I lost a
effective
part
or
of that
not? In victim
statement. Just hold on,
support,
hold on, hold on. Is it there in the chat?
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
I'll
yes,
yes,
read
ma'am,
ma'am.
it
yes,
again.
ma'am.
You should see that in the chat.
Yes, I am in
I'm
a chat.
seeing.
It is the last chat.
Hold on,
Victim
it is not
support,
appearing.
correctional service is more effective or not? Could you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm trying to read correctionals. I can't understand this thing.
Correctional service, prison service is
Okay.
more effective or not? Maybe he's trying to tell like probation and all.
Okay. Is it effective in?
Effective or not? Victim support, correctional
Uh-huh.
service is more effective or not?
Mm, yeah, I suppose so.
Correctional service is only support the accused, no?
Yeah, that is
The
true.
detention is in a way supports because he is
Yes, yes. Hold on,
incapacitated.
hold on. I'm
Yes.
just reading.
Ah,
Yeah, you're right. Like correctional services is for the criminal, right?
yeah. It is always
Yeah, it is
educated.
for the criminal. So victim support is for the victim. So we are talking about two different things here. So you cannot talk about correctional services being more effective for victim support.
Yes. You're
Yes.
right. You're right. Then
Is
there is
there a,
another
I'm
question.
reading the next one. Is
Ah,
there a suicide victim due to cyberbully, for example? Will they be considered as victim due to crime and will they be?
of course,
Yes, obviously.
Obviously.
Cyberbullying is also a crime, and yes, it is definitely they will be considered as victims of crime, and definitely they will be compensated.
Another smaller question is,
Yeah.
ma'am, if the person affected is cybercrime, uh, how to victimize? How he will be victimized?
How the process of victimization happens in cybercrime, is that what they're asking?
Yes, suppose
Yeah,
so.
so in cyberbullying, what happens is it all happens online, like in Facebook or chat. There are different kinds of victimizations happening there, like your small youngsters, calling each other horrible names, and creating, morphing their photographs, and continuously torturing them by sending messages, constantly sending messages, threatening them. And there are
Next
in fact
question is,
people who instigate others to commit suicide and stuff. So it is there are a lot of victimizations happening there.
another question is, um, uh, when the victim, direct victim is no more,
Mm.
who should initiate victim compensation?
Well, the victim dependence, as I said in the UN declaration, a victim is not only the actual person, the one who was victimized, and if they probably he or she lost their life, the dependents and the loved ones are also the victims. They're also considered victims. They can definitely represent the actual victim and seek compensation.
Yeah, another question is, this has got connection with that imaginary question. Your views on imaginary victims. Is there any relationship between PTSD and imaginary victim?
Well, if a person who has already been traumatized and is undergoing post-traumatic stress disorder, that is PTSD, and I wouldn't really call them as imaginary victims. They are victims. They have suffered some trauma, and that is why they are undergoing the PTSD. So you can't call them as imaginary victims. Imaginary victim is one who falsely accuses someone, and who who's projecting that they are suffering from victimization.
If a person lost money through cybercrime, how they will be compensated?
Well, I'm not sure about the actual process, but they will probably have to first go through the the official way of reporting the crime, and then taking up, and the case comes up, and then they apply for compensation. So yeah. So a person who's more well versed with cyber crime will probably be able to answer this question more effectively. But as of now, to my knowledge, compensation can happen only when the official circles, official process is gone through.
I think the questions are almost over, and it's time for me to call my HOD to give the thanks.
Oh, okay. May I say my thanks first?
Yes, ma'am.
You
Please,
can,
please.
Yes,
just,
yes.
ma'am,
Okay.
just a minute. You can
So,
just stop the sharing of the screen.
oh, okay. Right. I will. Just hold on.
You can have a photograph if you want of the screen, the participants.
Yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, I would like to thank the management of Karuna University, the Dean, Mr. Kennedy, HOD, Mr. Ranjit, Professor Sunanda, and all the other faculty members of Karunya for making this session happen and giving me this opportunity. Thank you to you all. I really appreciate it.
Sunanda ma'am, is anything to be made, or I can go with my...
Sorry, you can
Right.
proceed, sir. Thank you very
Yes.
much, Dr. Vijaya.
Okay, ma'am. Let me officially make it. So, on behalf of the Karunya Institute of Technology and Sciences, the Department of Digital Sciences, Division of Criminology. I would like to thank Vijaya Gauri Shankar Madam for sparing her valuable time with us with so many insights. Physically, I was not able to witness the entire talk of Vijaya Gauri Shankar because parallelly from 4:30 there is a session that is going on Future University where our chancellor is addressing, and I was asked by the management to participate in that. But I have the screen. I see that the pain in which the slides are basically created. So much insight, so much input was there. Thank you so much for taking time and making our students happy, making the participants happy in providing so many insights. So on behalf of the faculty, on behalf of all the students, I would like to thank you. I would also like to thank Sunanda ma'am for establishing contact with Vijaya ma'am and making it happen. I would like to thank Maclean sir for making the host. I would like to thank Sam or Saju, uh, Karunya University for hosting this Zoom meeting. I could find faculty and students from other universities, other colleges are also joined for today's webinar. So thank you all for who has joined. There are aspirants who would like to get higher education has also been joined in today's session. I would like to thank our own students who have joined for this webinar. So thank you so much for sparing your valuable time. Now I request every one of you to unmute your video so that a single picture can be taken on remembrance of this particular webinar. So I request every one of you who are there, kindly show the video so that one picture can be taken before we try to officially end the meeting. There is a feedback form that has been shared in the chat box. Kindly fill the form for your certificates. Those who are available, kindly show your faces so that we can take a picture before we try to officially conclude. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sam, for hosting this.
Thank you. Thanks so much, sir.
Thank you, sir. My pleasure.
There are little more. I need little more participants to show your faces so that the picture looks good rather than junk boxes.
Just
Is Maclean go with the pictures?
Yeah, ma'am, guest ma'am.
இருக்காங்க. Yes ma'am இருக்காங்க.
Yeah, Vijay ma'am is there. You just take it in the second screen, third screen. Vijay ma'am, just utter a couple of words so that you will be coming to the first screen.
I'm here.
Yes. Maclean, there are at least 4 or 5 screens. You can have it.
I'll just take few more. All the others are with the name only.
Yeah, they have come. Dr. Vijaya? She left?
Yeah, I'm here.
Madam. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Vijaya, for sparing us
Thank you,
time.
Sunanda.
Thank you. Keep in touch.
Maclean, any other information has to be shared?
As of now, we are draining out of other webinars. We need to fix few more things.
Yes. We will update.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vijay ma'am, once
Okay,
again.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Nanda
Thank
ma'am.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sam.
Bye.
Thank you, Maclean.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
So,
Thank you.
Sam, you can officially end this meeting. Thank you all.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Okay,
It
ma.
was
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful.